Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors, A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Sound Cuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
Tonight we're going to be talking about how to tell story with sound. And for those of us who are in the film and sound film business, most of our job is trying to help support story. And a lot of us came from music, so I know there's a lot of music engineers out there who are interested in post sound. And so I'm going to be walking through some of the different jobs in post sound and what we all do to help kind of support story throughout the entire sound process. So tonight I'm going to start out by telling you how I got started personally. I got started in sound actually through music myself. I was taking some guitar lessons and I was pretty bad at them. I thought I was going to be a natural. It didn't work out that way. But luckily, the place that I was practicing at was attached to a recording studio. So I ended up kind of wandering into that studio and fell in love. I have an uncle who is a patent attorney, and he worked with a lot of sound gear, a lot of, he patented keyboards and monitors and stuff like that. So I always was around audio gear. So I didn't feel intimidated at all when I walked into the studio, and that was kind of how I felt comfortable kind of getting my hands on it. And I worked in the recording engineering area for a while. That's what I studied in school as well. I worked there since I was a teenager at the recording studio. From there, I went to audio engineering school. From there, I went back into the studios, and then I found my way into post-production. At first, I found a job in overnight tape dailies, which was a part of the color process, actually, but I couldn't find any jobs in sound at first. So I did a little stint in color, which was great because I learned about, all the technical aspects of film, actual physical film. It was still film at that time. So it was kind of a great marriage between what I learned about film and what I previously knew about mixing, combined forces, and it made me very ready to get into post sound, which I took my first job in post sound as a tech, and I just supported the mix stage. So tonight I'm talking to you from a mix stage. We just wrapped actually about a half hour ago. So I'm at the end of a 12-hour day. So please bear with me. But as a tech, I supported the stage. I was in charge of being the liaison between the editorial team and the mix team. And I did that job for 9 years, and during which I was also editing and mixing on the side. And so I eventually was able to transition to be a sound supervisor and a mixer full-time. I've got some answers here from where you're all tuning in from. Oh, wow. That's okay. We've got Singapore, Toronto, Argentina. This is amazing. In UK and Australia. Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank everybody for being here. I know it's late and early, and I really appreciate sharing the love for sound. So I'm happy you all are here and happy to be here as well. So Seattle, that's cool. I love Seattle. And California, we're neighbors. Very cool. So I think I'll start off by saying how each job in post sound works, because I know a lot of things are changing, and there's in Hollywood at least there's a kind of a structure in our business that works well, and that is that the sound department gets its materials handed off to by the picture editorial team, And so I'll start there with the assistant editor. There's an assistant editor who supports the editorial team, the sound supervisor, as well as all of the editors. That includes the sound effects editor and the dialogue editor. And if there's a sound designer, separate sound designer, it would support them as well. And the sound supervisor, who is overseeing everything and usually in charge of ADR and ADR editing as well. So the assistant makes sure that everything comes over from picture editorial so that we can make our first assemblies, so that we can actually put together with all mics available what has been cut in the Avid or whatever the film editing software that they're using is. And then we put everything together and we start our work. I have a question about which mix stage I'm on tonight. I am on the Quinn at Sony, and it is very newly remodeled and renovated. It sounds great. I've been really enjoying it here. So let's see. Let's get started with how each seat in the sound department supports sound. So, as we said, we have a supervising sound editor who oversees all of the sound department in terms of editing. And they're usually the first person to receive a script. I'm a huge fan of getting scripts. I love to be able to engross myself in the story right away and be able to kind of imagine myself in the story through sound. It's also a really great time. There's no pressure at that time. So you kind of get to live in the script and walk around in your daily life and kind of think about what things you might be able to pull into that script, how you might be able to enhance what the director and what the writer is going for. Of course, you imagine how these scenes will look and feel. So it's always really great to be able to get brought on that early in the process. Doesn't always happen, but it is really helpful when it does. You can kind of imagine like different music moments, and you can also give some advice about some things to catch on set, like if there's a dance sequence to, provide for them a bump track so that people are actually moving in rhythm that they'll eventually use, which is helpful for making it seem cohesive. So supervising sound editor is the head of the sound editing department. And within that department, we have the assistant sound editor, which I already touched on a little bit, who takes all of the materials from the editorial crew, picture editorial, and then distributes them to the sound designer, sound effects editor, and ADR supervisor, ADR dialogue editor. And through this process, the sound supervisor will then go to a spotting session. Usually there'll be a cut out, either a director's cut or editor's cut. Depends on when they bring you into the process, but you'll usually sit down with the creators and really kind of hash out what they want things to sound like. We noticed that you have a car in the scene, and the car is it's a Prius, so it doesn't have too much personality. However, the person who drives the Prius is a very angry person. So do you want us to give it a little something extra to make it feel a little dangerous, or something like that? So I think that sound spotting is a good place to kind of get to know your filmmakers and figure out what it is that they're after, what kinds of things they'll pay attention to in the final mix, which the editorial team is eventually going to bring all of their materials to the final mix. So the goal is to get everyone on the same page creatively, offer options, figure out, what things are supposed to be highlight in the story. So from there, the assistant hands off to the sound supervisor and the editors. The editors go to work. The dialogue editor is in charge of making everything pristine, making sure that it's cohesive, making sure there's no bumps in the tracks, making sure that everybody can be heard, making sure that every mic is the best choice for each character. And from there's another very big part, which I think supports story a lot, where ADR is a process that happens if we don't have a good recording of a character. And a dialogue editor can sometimes go look at other takes and see where they can find another take that might work better. And knowing and understanding the intention behind the line. So exactly trying to figure out what the actor was emoting and what they were saying, not just the words, but what's behind the line, and being able to find a suitable alternative for the one that maybe has a car by or an extraneous noise on it is very important, to be able to be sensitive to those kinds of things. Instead of just finding a fix, it's finding the fix that works for the intention of all of the filmmakers who are behind you in this process that you're bringing their work to light. I have a few questions coming through here, so I'm gonna see what this is. What project made you go through your most creative flowing state? That's a hard question to answer. What project made you go through your most creative flowing state? Honestly, every project is different, and every project I feel like I grow more and more. Early on, when I was sound designing, I feel that I had to go through a lot of trial and error. And going through that made me realize that trial and error is actually one of the most beautiful parts of the process, and that it's not a bad part of the process. But I can't pinpoint a specific project because everyone has interesting challenges, and that's what makes me super excited to keep doing what I'm doing. I'll pick back up where I left off there. So dialogue editing, supporting story with the words, obviously, and as also keeping the intention of the actors. And then we have the ADR supervisor. Sometimes that's the same person as the sound supervisor, depending on how large the project is. And the ADR editor will go through, the ADR supervisor will go through the show or film and find out what it is that they need to replace. A lot of times the clients will come and say that they want to change a line, or sometimes there was a performance question, which is a little bit of a touchy subject, which is to be handled with care, because sometimes clients or sometimes actors and your director had a different idea of how to play a certain moment. And so in order to get something that everybody kind of agrees on, you have to work together. And it can be a really fun part of the process, but it's also making sure that you're staying true to the moment that you're supporting. And so the ADR supervisor will go through and cue some lines that they might need, and then from there they go work with the actors and the director to make sure that we get lines that will end up matching on stage. There's some really important things to look out for in ADR, which are projection is one. If an actor is yelling on screen, they might not feel comfortable yelling in a booth, or they might not think that they need to yell as loud as they need to. So you'll have to kind of coach them through that and make sure that the projection level matches, make sure that the sync is good, and make sure that pronunciation is good, and that that pitch is matching in, because a lot of times people are in different places. Our voices are interesting instruments and have many variations, and so sometimes you'll have to kind of remind people where they were pitch wise. So I'm getting a little off track, but let me get back on here. So we have the ADR supervisor, and then Foley's a really interesting sound tool as well. Foley's kind of, it's a little bit, it's one of our most important layers, I would say. It really gives you that kind of human and textural element. And, you've heard the phrase, they have a lot of pep in their step, and that generally means that they're happy or excited. And you can tell a lot by just how somebody walks. So if you have a character who's angry, you can express that they're angry just by having them walk a little heavier or a little faster. A lot of times the feet are not on camera. You only have the top half of your actor, but you can really express how they're feeling by how they're walking. If they're feeling down, they might drag their feet a little. So there's many different ways to add kind of like texture and emotion in little tiny pieces, like each Foley footstep. So that's one of the ways that they help. But they also bring a lot of humanness to a film soundtrack. There's like, so much like very subtle things that make us remember that we're sitting next to somebody, or feeling tension, and in the room you feel somebody slide across a counter. They don't even have to be on screen to know that they're getting closer. So there's a lot of little sound cues that Foley can help us bring to life that help. Let's see. We've also got one of the most important elements is obviously the sound effects edit, which, for those who don't know, everything that's captured on set, the goal on set is just to capture the people talking. Even the people talking in the background are only miming. They're not actually using their voice. We replace them later with loop group actors. So if the goal on set is to only cleanly record the actors' voices, then everything else is added and made. And so all of the layers of backgrounds, all of the birds and the wind and the cars that you see driving in the background, all of that is added. And so backgrounds, again, are a small piece of this puzzle that are very, very important. Helps you feel grounded in a scene. You can take them out and really feel your characters kind of floating in space. And then in that place, where you're supposed to have your focus. It's really effective to take sound out, to have like a big soundtrack and take it out. Backgrounds also provide the glue so that all of the other elements, like the dialogue that was cut, match with the ADR and make us feel that everything is surrounding us. For instance, when you're listening to a mix, a lot of the talking, most of the talking is happening in front of you. And so in order for the audience to feel really grounded, it's so nice to be able to add textural elements around the room that are kind of reminding you exactly where you are in the story. So that's one aspect of sound effects. And then another big aspect is, of course, the hard effects. Sound effects editors add everything from every door latch you hear, doorknob. They work in conjunction with Foley. Foley will do the human aspect of, like let's see, we're doing one door. Foley will do the door handle, whatever the hand is touching. And then the sound effects editor picks up there and does the creak and the latch, and how fast it opens is how short it is. And that's another thing to kind of realize, is that even something as simple as a door opening and closing can have so much emotion behind it. Is somebody scared? They're going to push the door. If somebody's angry, they're going to slam the door. So there's a lot of intention behind every choice, like even something as small as a door. So I feel that, sorry, we have somebody coming in. Hi. No, thank you. Sorry about that. We have a cleaning crew coming in because we were working late. I was expecting to do this from my house, but here we are. Okay, so then we also have, after all of the editorial process, and I'm so sorry, I skipped over it. The effects editor also makes everything come to life, like all of the gory elements. They work very closely with visual effects, like everything that's moving and shaping. Sound effects has to make every single moment an event. every single event that happens visually, sound effects covers and changes and can change the direction of like how something looks, because if visual effects is like growing, then our stuff has to feel like it's growing as well. And so there's a marriage there about what things to be felt and what things to be heard. And then also it helps you focus your attention. Like if there's something scary or big happening, the spatial assignment of where that event is going to happen happens with the sound effects. And things like car crashes and gunshots and punches and pushes, and there's just so many elements that sound effects covers. And then from there, from all of that editorial, sound supervisor usually goes through with a fine-tooth comb, make sure that everything that everyone's coming up with is kind of going with the intention of what the filmmaker wanted in the beginning. So they go through and they'll say, you know, I really love this moment in the sound design. I was thinking it would be cooler if it kind of bubbled up faster, or, you know, whatever it is. And then the sound supervisor will collaborate with the sound designer and kind of come up with, like, you know, multiple options, so that when we're on stage and we get everything together with music, that we can kind of decide what to feature and what gets swallowed up. For instance, if there's like sound design with a lot of low end, then it might get swallowed up with the music. So it's nice to have elements in all frequency ranges. So that's in a nutshell what we all do. I would like to go over a few commonly used techniques for sound in film. One very obvious one is voiceover. A lot of times people will propel story by actually having a character who is not on screen tell part of the story. So it can be recorded in a booth later. And just a side note there, we usually record that with a microphone that is different from what we use for ADR. For ADR, we use a shotgun, which is to match what was on set, so that it's like more of the same frequency response. And for VO, it's okay if it sounds a little bit more polished. So we'll use like a UA87 or something like that, something a little nicer. But we'll usually record like 2 or 3 versions. We'll have a lav just in case, and also a shotgun available. So voiceover is obviously a way that we use to propel story, just by setting people in a scene or telling people kind of over what we're seeing, what's happening. There's also a technique, pre-lapse and post-lapse, where they'll use sound to bridge a scene. So you'll have one scene that's outgoing, and this is in the case of a post-lap, where the person who you saw on screen continues talking and we see images from the incoming scene. And that will kind of help give like a nice crossfade between 2 different scenes and connect the 2 together, so that the person watching can see how one thing flows into the next. And the same with a pre-lap. Sometimes you'll be on somebody's face and they'll want you to connect that to the next scene, which is maybe in a totally different place, but these 2 characters are connected. So they'll have that other character from the incoming scene start to talk over the outgoing scene. Another commonly used sound technique is a flashback. Now, this is not just a sound technique, it's a video technique as well, or a film technique as well. But we'll use different sound treatment from what you're hearing in the regular dialogue, so that you can differentiate the difference between today and what's in the flashback. A lot of times we'll use a combination of reverb, or maybe if this person is going through something that's completely overcoming them, then we'll muffle out the dialogue, or we'll make it unintelligible, but you can tell there's dialogue. So in flashbacks, we use a lot of sound techniques to make sure that the audience knows that it's a different time or place, just like they do in picture. They'll sometimes color it different or make it in slow-mo, something like that, to really highlight that that's a different time period. Also dream sequences and drug trips, I would say kind of in the same category where you'll use like hyper or hyper surrealism to really like feel and highlight certain sounds. Um, Another time that's common to use sound as a tool is a jump scare. So that's when you put like a very heavy or sharp sound on a cut so that people are completely shocked. This happens a lot in horror films. It's very effective where everything kind of becomes quiet and paces down. And then you'll put a giant sound or like something sharp that makes the audience all jump back in their seat. And those are always fun to put in. There's some techniques for music in film are pre-records and post-records in addition to on-set recording. So if you're working on a very music-heavy film or project, they'll do a pre-record. So they'll record the artist or the actor performing a song, and then they'll play it back on set so that they can kind of, play back to it. And then they'll also record what's happening on set. And then there's also a post-record where they'll go into a studio and make like a polished version of it too. And I worked on a couple of films where we had all three versions, which was great because sometimes you want to feel the rawness of the like set recording, if there's like an energy there. And then you really want to take the song and bloom it and make it feel like it's really beautiful and polished. So to have different versions of the recording, you can blend them so that you feel it kind of coming bigger. There's an example of that in the film CODA I worked on. There's a few examples there. They did a great job of covering. They recorded, they did all three versions of the recording. So we were able to kind of like transition wherever we wanted to. And that was really, really nice to work with. I'd like to bring up another point, which is how to use your own personal style in storytelling. This goes all the way back to when maybe you got introduced to the project and whatever initial thoughts that you had come to life. I think that it's important to kind of hold on to those thoughts. I think the most important thing we can do is to create a soundtrack that is the dream of the filmmaker, and also to provide them with options that will help them maybe see their vision in a different way or add on to it. So I think that using your own personal style is really an important tool, because that's what we're all doing. We're doing art that's also engineering. And I think that the artistic approach is the harder of the two things in that equation. I do believe that anybody who wants to can learn Pro Tools and learn these tools. And then we all have a specific taste and a specific experience to add. And the Pro Tools and whatever plugins we decide to use are just tools that help us get there, help us tell the story. So I think it's really interesting to be able to kind of implement your own style. And we all have experiences that can be shared through sound. And even if they're small ones, they're all felt, and every little layer adds up. Kind of on a tangent there. We all love to talk about our plugins. I definitely am one of them. I always want to hear about the new plugins. I'm very, very, what's the word? Very dependent on some of mine, for sure. But I try to be more interested, again, in the story than in making my template the most souped up version of a template that exists. Of course, that happens over time. You add things and take things away. But the most important thing is to stay in touch and in tune with the personal aspect of sound, I think. There's a huge debate in general in our jobs about whether or not we are technicians or artists. Are we engineers or artists? And it's interesting because there's some science involved, of course, and I like to kind of compare it to like a painter, for instance. A painter has to know some science. They have to know how their paint breaks down, how it will react to certain emulsions, how it will mix with other colors, and what kind of brushes that they can, use to get the effect that they want. So these are things that we need to know too with our tools. But at the end of the day, when you look at a painter's painting, you're thinking about the finished product. You're thinking about how wonderful and beautiful it is, and not so much about, I wonder what kind of paintbrush they used. So I think it's the same in mixing. I think that applies to music mixing as well, where we have all of these tools and we should know them well. But the most important thing is how does it sound and feel at the end of it? And people use many different tools to get there. So it's easy. It's something I get stuck into about having very strong opinions about certain plugins. But honestly, if people get to the same place, if they're able to get what they had in their mind out of the mix that they're, whatever template they're using, then it doesn't really matter what they're using. Let's see. So another thing I'd like to talk about is the relationship of sound and music. So after all of those elements come together that I touched on, and I'll get to the questions soon too. I'll definitely leave some time. But after we get all the elements on the stage, sometimes things sound really great on their own. This happens all the time where a sound designer has come up with a layering of sounds that's incredible and sounds really cool. And then the composer has since gone a different direction with what they had. A lot of the times with sound designing, you're working with the temp score. And so you have an idea of what it will be like, but you don't know for certain every time. Some projects, they will allow time for you to really coordinate with the composer. And in that case, it usually turns out really well because you're designing against their finished music and you know what key to put something in, for instance. So it's really great when that happens, but it's with shorter schedules, it doesn't happen as often. So we end up coming onto the stage and doing a little bit of a balancing act. If there's two mixers, if there's a sound effects and backgrounds and Foley mixer, and also a dialogue and music mixer, then usually I'll get through my pass first as a dialogue music mixer. I'll get familiar with each of the stems, and then I'll let the effects mixer work through their block of material. They usually have several sounds that are layered. And as they're working, I'll think about what stems I had, and maybe there's a moment where I can pull back my really heavy drone track because he or she is introducing a new sound that will kind of compete in the same sonic region. So I'll figure out how to introduce that sound that they're working on and then get back into my music, or vice versa. They'll say, your music is really hitting this moment or this cut, and I don't really need this stuff. So we'll just play music there, or just play sound there. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens, a lot of collaboration. And I think collaboration is really important with storytelling. Everything we do is to make sure that the film is understood and felt. And a lot of sound is totally subjective. One thing might sound scary to one person and, robotic to another. And so there's really there's a collaboration that happens where everyone in the room kind of lands on what thing is becoming the most effective. And I think that one thing that I always think about is it's super important to think about sound in your daily life. I think about sound when I'm walking around, even when I'm startled, when I'm scared, I think about what kinds of things pop out to me. There's always this effect. There's an effect often used about if somebody's scared, like some certain sounds being heightened, like a car in a parking garage, or somebody's keys far away, or a dog barking that's kind of menacing. There's certain sounds that put people on edge, and there's a lot of physiology involved in sound. Like our bodies actually automatically react to being in danger, obviously. So like having being aware of what things make you feel that heightened state are good pointers to what you should put in your soundtrack. Or even if it's not something that's traditionally scary, but if it's in a frequency range that makes you scared, then like it'll be super effective. um so let's see. A lot of the times there's tone involved in sound design as well, and where to change tone. So in a scene, you'll have, sometimes, a lot of times you'll have things turn. So like somebody's, it's a good experience, and then some information is shared, and then the tone changes. Somebody gets upset or scared, and you have to figure out how to support that with sound. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Like there's subliminal sounds, like birds are usually happy sounds. And then, there's eerie sounds like longer sounding crickets. And so there's things you can add and subtract, like some winds are really calming and some winds are really eerie. So you can kind of layer these things so that you can start to lower the calm winds and push the eerie winds, or little shifts that you can do that help stay in tune and in the same direction as the story is going. So that's always a good way to do that. We're also very much in charge of pulling focus. So whatever the audience is supposed to notice is something we can highlight with sound. If somebody approaches or comes in a door, the timing of when they come in the door is important. There's always a lot of discussion about, does this character know that this person's in the room with them already? Should we hear their footsteps now, or should we hear them later as they turn around? Do we know, as the audience, do we know that they're there? Do we introduce them now or later? Maybe the character on screen hasn't noticed, but the audience wants to notice. So there's a lot of entrances of sound that are used to support the story and inform the inform the audience or inform the character. And you get to choose kind of how you want that to play, which is another interesting use of sound. And I think that that's one of the most important things we do, is kind of show the audience where to look, basically. So it's felt and not heard. It's something that people will pick up on, but not necessarily take them out or make them think that they're paying attention to something extraneous. So a lot of the times we'll just have information kind of softly given to the audience member by introducing certain sounds at certain spots. And it's not really noticed, but people will feel like, oh, yes, that's right, the lawnmower did start at that time. And that makes sense that later when we cut outside that, the mom is mowing the lawn, or whatever it is that we're trying to explain. I'm going to look through some of these questions now because I feel that I've left some behind. Okay, what qualities do you look for in your editorial staff? What makes dialogue editor easy to work with? So for dialogue editing, I work with a lot of great dialogue editors. I think one is with us right now. We did have for a moment, I'm not sure if he's still here, but we had, let's see, is he still here? I don't think he is still here, but I work with a lot of different editors. I have been working with one on The Boys called Ryan Briley, who is really great. And I feel like one of the things that I like working about with him is that he always has me covered in terms of microphone coverage. So some like the dialogue editor is meant to make the decision of which mics are the best to use. And in a lot of cases, he'll give me both so that I can make a more dynamic sound using both the lav and the boom. I usually favor the boom, but sometimes the actors will walk off, or especially if there's a lot of different characters in a scene, some of the actors will walk off mic, and so I can pick them back up on the boom and kind of blend those two instead of having to have my hands tied by just having one or the other mic. One thing that I really love in dialogue editors is organization, and if the tracks make a sort of logical sense to me so that I can keep mixing. The way that they show, I mean, my stage is dark now, but a lot of the times the tracks will, we have the preview here so we can see what's coming down, and it's really nice if everything's like kind of cascaded in a way that I can just move from these faders. I can be doing EQ adjustments on these, and then these ones are coming up so I can kind of cross over and start working on those. I really am a big fan of a logic that I can follow. And even if it's not my own logic, it's good to know what the logic is behind, how a certain scene was cut or why these characters ended up on these tracks. Another thing I really love is, and then again, between mixers, everybody has their own preferences. So I really like it when within a scene that the same character is on the same mic, so that if anything was weird about their mic or their proximity that I was fixing, then I can just go apply that as a starting point to the next section, because I EQ, I work on each region separately to help it make it sound like it's all part of one track. In terms of effects editing, I really look for subtleties, honestly. I think that it's really kind of easier to go after huge sound effects and do like big bombs and big guns. And it's easier to do that stuff than it is to do like the emotional stuff, like sound design, where you're just kind of giving tones and support. And also like even something as small as ocean waves. Like if you're trying to make an ocean feel like huge and dangerous as opposed to, a regular like day out sailing, then it's really important to put like lower end elements in the huge and dangerous part and have like the white water, like those higher elements kind of like come in and spark certain moments. And then, on a calmer day, the ocean should be choppy, but also follow each wave. So I really look at attention to detail and emotion behind a sound effects edit. So, and then another part of this question, which I think is a good question, is what makes a dialogue editor easy to work with. And honestly, I think the easiest thing in all of our positions is to be an open collaborator. We spend so much time and care putting these tracks together that I understand why it's a tendency to be kind of protective about the decisions you made or why you made them. But when you're in a room collaborating and somebody has some feedback for you, it's not personal. It's just about like this specific group of people or this specific project, and to be open and able to adapt or like change the way that you normally do something, even though if that something has worked wonders for you for most of your career, to be able to like, kind of just listen and make an adjustment, that's invaluable. And I feel that that's a really important part of mixing too, because every project's different, every client's ears are different, and you even if you have 20 years of experience, somebody comes in with new ears and you have to tune your sensibilities to them. Okay, so I have another question here, which is, When mixing and mastering music and film, what common mistakes that composers make that often go unnoticed or unmentioned? And what is the key element for me to look out for in engineering of the tracks? Okay, so that's a really great question because um, I am the final film mixer. However, the tracks come to me in all different kinds of ways. Sometimes they come from really, really well mixed scoring mixers, and you're like, these tracks are beautiful. I only have to like those are the easiest tracks to work on when the balance between the instruments is good, the cohesiveness between the instruments is good. We get everything delivered in stems, and it's really nice when you can solo the stems and it sounds like they came from the same room or the same place, that they are in within themselves a mix that you could like put um on on wherever you listen to music and enjoy it, and not think to yourself, oh my goodness, now the horns are popping out. Like the balance between instruments is good, and everything that lends itself to me to really keep the integrity of the music as I'm mixing it for the film. So a lot of the time when I'm mixing music for film, I think about the composer's intention, of course, because they're the ones who made this oftentimes like really intricate and very layered, beautiful music. And I would like to use as much of it as possible. I would like each of their decisions to be, utilized as much as possible. So I really try to use as much as I can. And then, I don't always overall lower, raise and lower music. I think it's, dynamics are super important in music. It's really nice to be able to kind of get out of the way of dialogue using more, EQ and like subtler changes in the music as you go, rather than just carving out level around the dialogue. And it's easier for me to do that when the mix itself is a lot more balanced. And then another thing is too, that sometimes I get stereo stems, which I can choose my own spreads, and that way I can really stay out of the way of music. And then sometimes I get 5/1 or 7/1 stems, and a lot of times they'll have, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but one thing that does hinder my mix a little bit is I don't have much control if they have a lot, like in the center channel, for instance, it's a big sound at the same time as a dialogue line. I will have to lower that more than I would like to. I'd rather just spread it out more. So of course we can use Spanner and other tools to like help us spread away from the dialogue rather than just lowering it. So if those kinds of thoughts are implemented in the score mix, then that makes my job a lot easier. One thing that has been going unnoticed is um, I actually might need to call on the community to answer these questions, but I feel like score mixing is not as commonly a line item, that a lot of the times the composers are actually paying for this for themselves, and I think that that's kind of making that process a little shorter and maybe not as polished as it once was. And then I have another follow-up to that question about what mistakes the score mixers make when they deliver to the stage. And I think I covered some of the mistakes that I, commonly encounter. But another thing I would just keep in mind is whether or not your composer has composed with, so this is controversial to say maybe, but a lot of times composers compose while listening to the dialogue, and a lot of composers will listen to, they'll be obviously acutely aware of the story and the emotions behind the story, but when they actually do the work of composing, they don't have the dialogue track up because it will distract them, of course, from their own creative process, which I understand. But in that case, it's really nice if the scoring mixers can kind of keep an eye out for moments that might conflict, or if maybe the timing of something lands on the same moment as a whispered dialogue line, then maybe we can move off of that moment a little bit in anticipation. Of course, we do a lot of these adjustments on the stage, but it's nice if people can kind of look out for that. And another thing is a lot of times a score mix will be delivered to us with a lot of baked in reverb. And unfortunately, it's easier for us to add our own like tail verb. So a lot of times we'll need to like elongate a moment or shorten a moment, and it's nice if the stems themselves are not super drenched. It's nice if the stems are mixed, in balance with each other, that have a reverb that they agree on, that's like kind of like a short or smoothing reverb. And then for anything that's like a really long reverb, it's nice if we can add those ourselves, because sometimes we have to adjust that on stage. Somebody asked, what are my key questions during a spotting session? Key questions, I'm really trying to get to know the creators. I'm really trying to know what they're after. So a lot of times I will ask about the environments. I'll ask about, if they're in a big city, are they in a high rise, or are they closer to the street? Do you want it to feel like busy and hectic, or do you want it to feel kind of isolated from the world? I'll ask about, certain elements of cars, sound effects. I'll ask a lot of times now they have temp-in sound effects, so I'll listen to what they have, and I'll have my own ideas as well. And I'll ask if what they have is something that they've been working on for a long time and that they want to keep that direction, and then we'll just enhance that direction, or if they would be okay with me trying something else, because I could potentially see an opportunity to go a different direction with the sound. So I'll ask questions based on that. I love to watch the cut before the spotting session, because a lot of times, again, time is like very short, and a lot of times we'll be doing the spotting session with the composers, and a lot of the notes go to the composers, and not in that case, when we're spotting together, there's not a ton of talk about the sound effects. So you kind of have to have an idea ahead of time of the questions you want to ask. So I'll ask questions like time of day, if it's not clear, because we can help make it clear. Anything that needs clearing up, we can support with sound, I'll ask in a spotting session. I'll ask what kind of characters they want their vehicles to have. I'll ask, if they want it to, if there wants to be a sound design moment somewhere that we have an opportunity to pull back sound, or if we have an opportunity to heighten sound. And a lot of times I'll make other film references depending on the style of the show, because a lot of times you can see sometimes there's like nods to other styles of filmmaking or something, or it's recognizable tone that you can ask about to make sure that you're kind of picking up on this suggestion that they have in their filmmaking. I have another question of, have I worked with other engineers and departments that use other DAWs other than Pro Tools, and does it make it hard to become collaborative across the industry? So composers use all different DAWs. I would say it's a lot less standardized than it is for us. We pretty much all use Pro Tools here in the US. I know that in other places, I have seen Nuendo used as a film staple. It does make it hard. Like if anybody on my anybody who's working on my crew, I would ask that they would be responsible for changing whatever session they're in, like changing it into a Pro Tools session, because everything we deliver to the stage here, at least in Los Angeles, is in Pro Tools. So we have to be able to make sure that it converts and opens up well before it gets to stage. It's that would be part of my job as a supervisor, to make sure that there's no hiccup in the delivery. So I would be open to collaborating with other people as long as they can convert their sessions into Pro Tools. And of course, composers will use whatever DAW they want, and then their music editors or their scoring mixers will then deliver to us in Pro Tools. Let's see. How often do you make custom sounds from scratch versus pulling from a library and film? And this is Kyle said, I've found I rarely get the opportunity to create custom sound effects for network TV. It's true. For network TV, it's really hard. You're usually on time. It's all about time. I mean, there's so little time that it's really hard to find time to actually create sounds. A lot of the times, I have an embarrassing thing to admit to my sound community here is that I use Reason. I still use Reason for sound design as well because it's really easy for me to pull up a patch and make something that I want to make and export it out to Pro Tools. So sometimes when I was doing sound design and I couldn't find the right riser or the right timing of the riser, or like I'm putting something throughout a scene and I wanted it to be kind of, in a certain key, or I wanted it to be kind of intermittent, and it's easier just to perform it on a keyboard, then I would just do that. But I would say for most of the things that are not out of the ordinary, like if I'm just cutting a car chase or a car scene, I have a lot of library information, or like a lot of library that I can pull from to make a complete car chase. And of course, I'd rather go record the cars, especially if they're a rare car. But I oftentimes won't have time to do that unless it's a bigger or longer project. I have another question. What do you think is a good strategy to organize yourself if you're doing all the sound yourself? And how would your workflow be different when you're working with big teams? So I do small projects often, especially if it's a filmmaker I've worked for in the past that I really enjoy their sensibilities or I enjoy their films. I will always do their films no matter what the size is. And sometimes I'll have to wear more hats in that scenario. And I still treat it separately. Like I still will cut my sound effects. I'll cut my sound effects and BGs in the same session, but I'll wait to pull them together till the mix, because it just, for me, and this is not everybody, but for me, it's easier for me to kind of keep in one channel before switching over, because I feel like a dialogue edit to me is like a different part of your brain than when you're creating sound design. So it's better for me to kind of compartmentalize it, even if I'm doing all of the jobs, to have different sessions for different areas. But of course, that's not my favorite way. Again, I really find joy and value in collaborating. So I try to collaborate as much as possible. But staying organized, it's the same. I make sure that I save my sessions with the version of the picture. I make sure that every session kind of matches itself in the timeline. Like if I get a conform in and I was working on the sound effects edit, I'll stop down and conform everything before moving on. So I'll just make sure that every session stays up to date, and I also keep them separate until I run it together before the stage. Spot session with a composer. Do you prefer to have music stems for each instrument in stereo or multi-channel format? Honestly, it depends. I mean, sometimes I feel like if the composer is, if it's not an afterthought, like how do I say this? If people aren't just using spreaders to spread their stems, I'd rather do it here on the mix stage. Because I don't think there's a one size fits all for spreading. So I think that like certain things spread really well, other things, it's really nice to have narrow. So I like to make those decisions unless the composer was also composing in 5/1, and then I understand that they're already hearing it that way, and it's really nice with like strings. And a lot of the times composers will give me like a combo. They'll deliver their strings and their live orchestral as 5/1 stereo, or sorry, as 5/1, and then the rest of their stems as stereo, and that works out really nicely too, because then they already have like the room and space on on those larger, string sections, and then everything else I can choose kind of how to dance around them. And that's good to know that Cubase seems the most popular. I wish, honestly, I wish I could learn some more. I'm talking about the comment about a composer telling us that they say that Cubase seems to be the most important and that composers use different DAWs. I wish that we had I wish we had more experience in different DAWs, because I'm so married to Pro Tools at this point. I mean, I try to use my quick keys in mail. So I don't know what would happen if I opened a different DAW at this point. I have used Nuendo and it seems like Nuendo is really easy to use, but again, I'm not used to it. It's not a language like Pro Tools is for me. And I'm glad I got some support with the Reason. I love Reason too. So somebody's asking how I use it. I actually will just use it separately. I don't actually rewire it, but I will open it and play along. I'll use it for sound design. Sometimes I'll import my own sound and trigger it in Reason, but a lot of times I'll use a patch with some effects and actually print what I'm trying to export. Not at times I'll print a large section of it so that I can cut it up how I want to into Pro Tools, and also use it later for if I want to reuse it for something else in the future. Somebody says, with the advent of streaming, in my opinion, are there inherent differences mixing for theatrical versus TV? This is a great question. This is a still evolving answer to. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to go over on my time, but I'm going to try it. So I think that we are allowed at this time to use a lot more dynamics in a TV mix. Before, there was a pretty big difference with what kind of frequency response you were working with in terms of like television versus theatrical, and there was a lot of kind of styles for TV mixing that was a lot more, I would say, processed and less dynamic than a film mix, and that is no longer necessary. I think that it's really important to keep dynamics. I think that it's, again, like back to the storytelling aspect of it, it's really important to be able to kind of push your audience and pull them in when you want them to. And dynamics absolutely let you do that. They let you kind of, set a scene a little bit quieter so people lean in and really pay attention to what dialogue is happening there, and then give you the full ride of, all the crazy sound effects and everything that's like totally overblown. So I think that there's less of a difference now, but you still have to think about translation a lot as you're mixing, especially if you're mixing with a lot of dynamics like we have been recently. And then another thing to kind of piggyback onto that is that films have traditionally, they have a separate mix for home theater, and that's still the case for the most part. But in some of the smaller projects, you don't get a secondary pass. You don't get another a home theater mix. So in that case, you are thinking about it the kind of the same way that you're thinking about how a streaming television show will translate. Okay, and then another, we have, what's my go-to room reverb? I really love Stratus, so I've been using that a lot. I'd say that's my go-to. I use that most often, and I like it because it has so many adjustable parameters. So a lot of times I'll bring up one of their presets and then I can change it drastically with the balance between the speakers. I can change the frequency roll off, the envelope. I can change how it evolves in the room. So it's I really do like that reverb because it's very controllable. So that's it. Yeah, I spent today doing, just what we were talking about the, storytelling. And I feel that it's really important to kind of not lose focus of, the intention of the film. We love sound. We all love sound, everybody who does what we do. And we also spend a lot of time and effort getting all of these sounds to the stage and then making them play with each other and developing a relationship between them. And it's really hard to remember that sound is actually not the goal. The story is the goal. And it's also not our film. So as much as, we have opinions about how things can play, I think it's our job to really support the story as much as we can, and then kind of give in to the creative process and use the tools that we have to pivot, to try things, to experiment. Experimentation is the most fun part of this job. And I think that as long as we can use our tools and our experience to show people different options quickly, swiftly, then it becomes a much more rewarding process. I've got one more thing here and then we'll wrap it up. What do you recommend to find more work in the filmmakers in Los Angeles, India, or otherwise? It's honestly right now it's a hard time. I will say it's been a little slow going and getting back up to speed since all of the happenings, but it is coming back. So I think right now the best thing to do is just try to get your hands on any kind of work to sort of just like, strengthen the muscles or keep them working. Like obviously there's a lot of opportunity in finding, indie films or short films, even keep that going. I mean, I still work on short films with there's a lot of times there's a lot of rewarding aspects to working with new filmmakers who've made a short film that, they're going to make a feature soon. And it's nice to kind of develop relationships with people early so that you can start communicating in a way that they trust you to handle their sound. Because that's one thing that I tell my clients a lot is, and I really feel it, like, thank you for trusting me with your film, because the sound is really, it's how are people going to hear it? Are people going to hear it clearly? Are people going to feel it? Are people going to pick up on all the cues? Like there's a lot of responsibility in sound, and I feel really grateful that my clients or, filmmakers trust me to carry that through for them. So I just exercising the muscle and reaching out to people, getting your work to as many people as you can. It's really nice if you can show people a piece of work that you've done that you're proud of, so that people kind of know what your style is. That's important too. And yeah, I hope that everything starts to pick up again so that we can all use some of these fun tools that we've been talking about. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for tuning in. I hope it was helpful, insightful some way. I was a little bit all over the place. Please forgive me, but I really appreciate you all tuning in and being here. And I'll see you next time.